Good morning. It's morning here. I was reading last night this book. I don't know if you've read it before. David and Goliath, Malcolm Gladwell. And the reason I picked it up is because I've been writing about teaching yoga, and I got a little bit kind of stuck. Like, I understand what my experience is, and then I wanted to read just about teaching in general. And I had put down this book a long time ago, and I picked it back up. I guess unconsciously I realized that the reason I stopped reading it at that time was because I got to a point where our fine friend Malcolm, and I've read many of his books in the past, and this is the first time where I got to a point where I was like, Malcolm, no! Just like, so just sharing my resistance and horror and alternative perspective with you. If you haven't read this, he's talking about what it's like for the little guy to fight the big guy, and it's something that I really resonate with. Every rebel feels this way, and people who have small businesses or grew up under conditions of adversity and end up joining mainstream will feel this way as well. And just David and Goliath is a really, it's a beautiful title, and it's a beautiful story, allegory, and he does such a good job with the beginning until like chapter 2 or 3, and he starts talking about school. He writes that the classroom size doesn't matter as much as we think it does, and that it is a very elite and elitist perspective to think that a smaller class size translates to better education. So that was a hard pill for me to swallow. He doesn't write about, this is interesting, he doesn't write about his educational background. I think that he went to a state school. It doesn't say it here. I think he went to a state school in Canada. But for my perspective, I went to public schools in New York, which is, public school, but very good public school. I was in Long Island. And we had the IB program, meaning that if you were academically excelling compared to the average, you get placed in these higher level programs, and they're supposed to be really rigorous, but I was, pretty bored, and I would cut classes and get detention, or I graduated at the top of my class anyway. I didn't study too much, study too hard, graduated at the top, went to Duke, where that was a rude awakening. You had to work really hard I had to work really hard for my grades there, and I was like a B+ student in the really hard classes, and I was an A+ student in the psych classes. I could ace the classes without buying the textbook, but if it was like biochemistry, like, Lord help me, like, hard. You had to spend hours studying and memorizing things, rote memorization. And I'll tell you that in my experience, when I had class sizes of like 30 people in lectures, and it didn't matter, what lecture it was, what topic it was, whether it was public school or private school Duke, I really connected with my teacher. I would go after school, I would go after class, and I would chill with my teacher, and I would ask a lot of questions, and I would figure things out, and it was way harder for me to connect with the very hardcore science teachers, like the chemistry teachers. I didn't feel that connection, but my math, maybe he's watching this right now, but with math I felt good, and psychology, of course, I just basically got hired to do research right away, and that was, Lord, that was wonderful. So Duke being an elite school, I get that. And also growing up, I would take private lessons, and this is from my parents. Private lessons for tennis, for dance, and for piano. And I learned well, I learned really well. So what Malcolm Gladwell is saying is that he's just tapping into these core human traits that make me really uncomfortable, like laziness. He's saying that if you have a class size of like 22 versus a class size of 18, it doesn't make a difference, because instead of the teacher giving every student more attention, the teacher will just do less work and go home earlier and be happier. And he says doctors do the same thing, that if they have 15 patients to see one day, they'll give them all a certain amount of time, and if the next day they have 5 patients, they'll just go home early. They don't spend more time per patient. So to me, this is just pointing out a flaw in the way humans treat other humans. It's not proving what I think he's trying to say, which is have big class sizes, that's just an elitist thing. You don't have to spend a lot of money per student. You don't have to spend a lot of time and energy per student. And in fact, this is a place where I don't have personal experience. This is awkward to say. I'm sorry if that sounds arrogant, but he writes that if you are a poor, he uses the word poor, which he doesn't mean like rich poor financially. He means doesn't perform well in classes, which could be anything. It could be emotional, it could be parents at home, it could be concern about anything. But for students who are not performing well in classes, he uses again the word poor students, poor performers, they need to be with a lot of other students who are also poor. Again, not my words. Poor students need to be surrounded by poor students, is what Malcolm is saying. Because there's a higher chance of somebody asking the question that the quiet person has. And that's another thing that I thought was really strange, that you could describe students as being poor when that's not really the issue. If somebody's not engaged or attentive, that's a totally different situation. That's where emotional counseling needs to come in. That's where a teacher ought to step in and ask the right questions. And if you want a good book about this, you can read The Priority List. Beautiful. I thought that teacher maybe gave too much of his life to his students because his marriage fell apart as a result. But, we're talking about, I would probably choose that extreme. If you know me, you know. But the other thing that he talks about from a teacher's perspective is that they don't like having a lot of quiet students because they want charismatic, is the word they use, so charismatic and poor. Charismatic students who are going to drive the conversations because it makes discussions easier. I mean, maybe you could just make the material more interesting, And I found this really destabilizing because in my perspective as a student of yoga was very different from my perspective as a student of academics. Still with yoga, I was very, very close with my teachers. I would have their texts on my phone and, a lot of information just in casual conversations, and probably they remember me as being a little annoying and clingy or something like that. I don't know, but I would just love spending time with my teachers and trying to learn everything, because I understood it's not just on the mat. But as a student of yoga, I felt like, I am not really getting educated in a group class. And this is maybe because I've had so much experience doing private classes, doing one-on-one classes my whole life. I know what it's like when a teacher talks to you and tells you what you need to learn, as opposed to being in a group class. And if it's fitness, it's different, spin class or step aerobics, whatever, the stuff that we used to do back in the day. That stuff is fine, step up, step down, step up, step down. But if you're trying to really learn yoga, people just get incredibly injured throwing their bodies around trying to do what somebody else is doing because they're hearing these cues designed for the average. And the bigger the class size is, the less specific the cues can be, because you have to speak to more and more of a generic population. And there is no curriculum really for yoga. Like if I'm teaching what's labeled an advanced group class and I show up and people can't do down dog, people can't do plank, I can't teach an advanced class. It doesn't matter, You have to teach to who's there, and you have to teach to how they show up in that moment, in that day. So I've seen this many times, people that have really beautiful high talents, or they've been making progress over the last 6 months. Suddenly they went partying real hard all weekend. This is New York City. They partied hard Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They show up Monday, they can't do a thing, These things happen, the life choices. We're working with adults now, and adults make adult choices. And, if you have a ton of work and you're just spending 12 hours a day at the office, and you go home and you're taking care of kids and you're paying the bills, some people, the fact that they come to class is the brilliant, beautiful thing, whereas, children that they're talking about, we were forced to go to school, right? So until I was old enough to cut classes off by myself, I went to school. So that to me was a big difference, that when I was in a group class for yoga, I didn't feel that I was getting much out of it. It was just kind of like the movement high, and I know that there's much more to it. So working one-on-one with teachers for yoga changed my life, which is why I teach so much, primarily one-on-one. And I realized in reading this and in thinking about, growing up Indian, and many ethnicities will feel this way, because there are many ethnicities with comparison to America where education is very important. Like if I got a 97 on a test, I did not do well. I was made sure that I was understood. I did not do well on that exam. A 97 out of 100, not good enough. But, when we're working with a more general population and people who weren't raised with those sort of exacting standards, showing up and trying is the beautiful thing, right? So that's what earns the good job. That's deserving of praise. That's a big cultural shift for me. I think it's been enlightening and beautiful and softening. And I'm still very hard on myself, because that's the only way I actually do good work. But when I teach, I've learned over the years to say good job, because it is. So what I feel that is missing from this perspective of class size mattering or not mattering is that if you are working with physical bodies and emotion is very clear, you can look at a group of human bodies, and every person has been through so many different experiences, especially as adults. You accumulate experiences that class size is a serious issue. You can't teach a festival class with the same kind of specificity and learning and individual enlightenment in mind as teaching one-on-one or semi-private classes, which I think is a really nice middle ground, and a place that I've been exploring more recently. It does put more of the responsibility on the student to show up. Like I was saying, it is good job to come, to say this is important, I want to learn, I want to feel my body, I want to work my body. I know that there's more than to physical life than sitting in a desk, that there's much education still to feel and to learn and to unveil, much healing work to be done. In terms of an academic classroom, I think it's the same. I think we can just value education at a much higher level. Personally, I would say that emotional education doesn't get the attention it deserves. If a student is a poor performer, we're basically acting like intellect is a set point that can't be changed, and a poor performer is a poor performer and is going to be treated that way their whole life. And I just don't think that's fair to the human potential. So those are some of my discomforts with a dear friend, Malcolm. I doubt he would ever see this, or anybody who knows him would ever see this video, but if you read this book, David and Goliath, I think the first few chapters are just really extraordinary. And then when you get to this education thing, maybe you're going to feel the same way. It's really heartbreaking to see that investing in education is being put down in this way, where we can be investing more time and love in education, and I think our culture, our economy, our everything in America would change for the better, and maybe the planet, because we really dominate so much of the culture. I would love to see changes in the yoga education system, just people being more educated in general. Like, I don't think it's enough to take a teacher training course. I think you need to know philosophy. I think you need to really know anatomy. I think you need to have a daily practice. And I mean daily. I don't mean like, oh, today I woke up in the mood to stretch. No, I mean like you worked your ass off this morning and had something real to give to your students. I think that's really important. To love the game that you are in, I think that's super important. Maybe some of that resonates with you, maybe some of it doesn't, but I've been feeling a lot of this stuff and I'm sharing with you, and I hope you practice, and I hope you learn, and I hope you're reading, and I hope you're moving, and God, I hope you're breathing and enjoying being alive. More to come. Enjoy your day.